Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen will be back with the Indianapolis Colts in 2025. Is it the right move? Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Horseshoe Huddle Podcast presented by Indianapolis Colts on SI.com. My name is Andrew Moore, and as always, I'm joined by my partner in crime here at Horseshoe Huddle, Drake Wally. Drake, the Jaguars game feels like eons ago, and we'll talk a little bit about the Jaguars game at the end. We might spend 5 to 10 minutes on that game that was really difficult to watch in the first place, but Jim Irsay wasted no time in coming out and backing his head coach and general manager for the 2025 season. The Colts are going to keep status quo at the top two positions in their organization for next year. And honestly, I think we could see this coming, even though fans certainly didn't want it to happen. But I think, it's certainly over the past 24 hours, the Colts fan base has probably been as irate as I've ever seen since I began covering this team, Drake. But honestly, should they have been? Because we'll talk about it tonight, but in my opinion, I kind of saw this coming.
Yeah, I mean, you even mentioned that you expected Chris Ballard to be back. Now I think that what was really a shock is that you barely beat just an absolute, yet again, another awful team that doesn't even have their starter. They don't have Evan Ingram. They don't have a running game anymore, and they don't have Christian Kirk. And yet again, a rookie in Brian Thomas destroys you. You barely win this game. I think fans were just shocked that it was so fast. It's like right after this happens, letter right away. Gives plenty of time for guys like Pat McAfee and guys like Darius Butler to absolutely piece it apart. And look, we'll get into it. I mean, it's a very curious decision. I think that it's one that, yes, we did see coming, but like I mentioned, it's just the speed of it. It's like right after an abysmal performance where you barely win, you have to take the Jaguars to overtime in your own stadium to win. No one's even watching your damn game. And that is the response. It doesn't even take him a second to think about it. So I don't know, man. I don't know how I feel about it. I guess I'm shocked just for the timing. I figured it would take a little longer.
Yeah, and this is the fun part about doing a live show, Drake. Literally 40 seconds ago, the Colts have posted that they have parted ways with defensive coordinator Gus Bradley. So that is so that we're definitely going to talk about that tonight as well, ladies and gentlemen. And really, I put this out on X earlier that Gus Bradley, his contract was up after this season anyway. So basically, he's not being fired his contract literally just isn't going to be renewed. So that's something that I think we'll keep in mind. But obviously now we got even more to talk about tonight, guys. Let's check out the chat here already. We have a super chat from Lindsey Mack across the pond. Thank you so much for all of your support, brother. Really, really do appreciate it. Thank you, Andrew, Drake, and Stats Map, sponsored by Busch Light, for your content this season. Quality as always. You're all legends. Well, Lindsey, you are an absolute legend, my guy. Appreciate all of your support. It's always a joy when you're able to join us live, or if you can't join us live and you're commenting hours beforehand because of the time difference. We appreciate the hell out of you, man. Really, really do. Paul Wilson, another legendary figure here at the Horseshoe Huddle Podcast, his $5 super chat. Thank you for all of your support. If being angry were people, I'd be China right now. We like our guys with the mad face. So yeah, Paul Wilson not happy, and I think a lot of the fan base is not happy about that. We'll obviously dive into everything about that here tonight. Stats Matt in the chat. The season is finally over. Wish that wasn't the case to be happy with, but here we are. Certainly. Hustleman Jones is here. Let's be honest. What is there to discuss? We all know what to expect next season, and hopefully that will be the end of it. There's plenty to discuss. I'll tell you that. That's for sure. And then we've got, Stats Matt breaking the news as well. Gus is not being retained. We got Semper Colts fan. Hate Irsay's move. Insanity. Although Warren train, the Tyler Warren train, there might be another tight end train coming this offseason, guys. Just get ready for it. Tony Copeland, thank you for the $10 super chat as well. Really, really do need to appreciate it. And Tony's got a different angle about this. People just need to relax, 4 losses by a total of 19 points were super close. So some positivity from Tony there. Thank you for all of your support as well. Guys, be sure to go follow us on all of our socials, like Horseshoe Huddle on Facebook, follow at Colts_SI on X, and subscribe to the Horseshoe Huddle YouTube channel. Hit that bell, turn on the notifications. You never want to miss us. And if you can't catch us live, no worries. Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you listen to podcasts, we're on there as well. So be sure to subscribe. Give us a 5-star review so we can reach other Colts fans just like you. Guys, we'll talk about the Gus Bradley firing
course,
here in a little bit, but we do have to start out with Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen returning to the Indianapolis Colts in 2025. Drake, like I mentioned, Jim Irsay made the announcement last night. Certainly much quicker than I thought that it would happen. I was thinking maybe there would be something that would come out on Monday about this. But when you saw that letter that Jim Irsay wrote to the fans announcing that Ballard and Steichen would be back in 2025 and everything else that he kind of said in there, what was your gut reaction? Of course, we got to give our gut reaction to the news that Ballard, more specifically, that Ballard would be back in 2025, because I think we all guessed that Shane Steichen would be back next year.
Yeah, Steichen was no surprise. I thought it would be shocking if he parted ways with Shane Steichen. I just have never seen a general manager stick around with such mediocrity for more than 8 years. You're going to go into year 9 with this now. Does he have 1 year, 2? I mean, at this rate, I wouldn't even be surprised if he has 2. Jim Irsay seems to love himself some Chris Ballard, but it was a bit disappointing, because I'm not going to lie, I agreed with what you said. I thought that they needed to change direction. I thought that if for no other reason, listen to these players, man. Listen to guys like DeForest Buckner, what he said today. Listen to guys like Kenny Moore earlier in the season. Just the disappointment in some of these guys' voice. I mean, you got Zaire Franklin out there trying to punk Pat McAfee when he's not even around. Okay, like stupidity on that football team. And your general manager, not saying that he started it, but he is overseeing it. Okay, and it's weird. I mean, maybe there's something we don't see. Maybe Ballard has a clear plan that he changed that Irsay likes all of a sudden, but it just goes back to that press conference where Jim Irsay hired Jeff Saturday, and he uttered the greatest quote I've ever heard in my life. I don't know how to make sausage. I don't know what goes into sausage, but I do know how to build a football team. And it's like, I mean, maybe you know how to build a football team. You used to. And that really helped to have a guy like Bill Polian as a general manager. So I'm not saying that those guys grow on trees. That is a Hall of Famer we're talking about. And Chris Ballard did lose Andrew Luck, but that's so long ago. And I don't like the decision. But who are we to tell Jim Irsay he's wrong? He owns the team. I just feel like there were other candidates. There were general manager candidates you probably could have maybe fielded some interviews for, and maybe compete with Ballard, press him a little bit. I don't know. Like, it was just so fast.
And the thing is, for all the people that have been watching the show, watching us on Bleacher Report, that Drake and I have, really since the Denver Broncos game have been saying that we think it was time for the Colts to move on from Chris Ballard. Yes, the timelines weren't lined up exactly. Or they wouldn't be lined up if you would bring in another GM. They wouldn't be lined up with Steichen and with Anthony Richardson. But it was time. The culture seemed broken. It was the same thing over and over again. Running it back with the same team hasn't worked. Certainly not bringing in enough competition. There's been some complacency issues, and I think that what the players have said over the past couple of weeks have indicated that, especially when you hear from the leaders. But I wasn't shocked that Chris Ballard was retained. I said that would I fire Chris Ballard? Yes, I think it was time to move on, but I'm not Jim Irsay. And I thought the reality of the situation was that it was probably 50-50, leaning 60-40 that Chris Ballard would be back. And certainly he was, and that's what the case is. Chris Ballard is coming back to be the general manager for the Indianapolis Colts. And I know everyone wants to talk about the timeline. It's been 8 years. There hasn't been a change. And I think this just kind of confirms things, Drake, that it confirms what we've been saying about the timelines, that the Chris Ballard timeline was reset after the 2022 season when Shane Steichen was hired as the head coach and when Anthony Richardson was drafted to be the franchise quarterback. Chris Ballard was then tied to Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson. We no matter what we say, I think this just reaffirms that we can't look at this as an 8-year thing anymore. It's almost like the first 6 years of the Chris Ballard tenure never happened because he is tied to Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson. He got that fresh start when the Colts decided, when Jim Irsay decided to part ways with Frank Reich and keep Chris Ballard on board. So I think that's what we're going to have to just expect to look at moving forward. Now, if there isn't any improvement after next season and we don't see this Colts team take a step, we don't see Anthony Richardson take a step, I do think it's more likely that they get fired because he is tied to Shane Steichen, to Anthony Richardson, and then it will be 3 years. And if there's still no improvement, then I would think that it's a higher likelihood that Ballard's gone, Steichen's gone, Richardson's gone, and this thing gets torn down to the studs. You know, I truly think so. Paul Wilson with another super chat here. Ballard would have to go 10-7 for 2 consecutive seasons just to have a 500 winning percentage. Sorry, stats, stole that from Pat McAfee. Well, hey, I did see that on Pat McAfee's show that even a couple of winning seasons out of Chris Ballard and he'd still have a losing record as a general manager. Pat McAfee did not pull any punches today. So Paul, thank you again for all of your support, man. We really do appreciate it. So and we've got a rare appearance from Noah Jabert. Good to see you, my friend. Drake doing an appearance on SNL soon. Didn't know you had impressions in your arsenal. So you love to see.
You hear enough of Irsay ramble
when Drake brings out the Jim Irsay impressions, it is must-see television, must-see podcasting, whatever you want to call it. Good to see you, Noah, really, as always. But Drake, so getting past that, you know, initial reaction or what people might react, whether people like it or not, Chris Ballard is going to be the general manager of this team. You can choose not to support the team, you can choose not to watch that team. It's your prerogative as a fan. But for us that are going to continue to watch, continue to follow, continue to cover this team, you know, just because fans aren't watching doesn't mean Chris Ballard's not going to go away. It just means doesn't mean the Colts aren't going to go away. So let's thoroughly dissect this. What do you think Chris Ballard must do in 2025 if he wants to stay with this team beyond just next season? Or what do you think it's going to take for Chris Ballard to seriously turn this team around, if it's even possible for him to do?
Oh, man, I think that right out of the gate, you really need to do something in free agency. And I think that you can't, I hate to say this because you don't want to say don't re-sign guys, right? I mean, there's still a livelihood, right? You heard Joe Flacco talk about it and Michael Pittman too. You know, you got to treat this job different. It's a job, but it's so much more special than that, right? And so you also need to put a winning product in front of fans, right? A consistent winning product, not 9 wins, but at least 10. You need to have 10 as your floor from here on out if you're Chris Ballard. Even DeForest Buckner said, I'd like some freaking free agents. Okay. I mean, like this is a team that will have the salary cap. I think that you need some free agents in this next offseason. I also think that you need to, I'm not saying that Leatu Latu was not a fantastic pick. I think that you will have at least a Quiddy pay there. At least that's the floor, I think. 8 sacks a season. I think he's going to have more sacks than that just because his craft is more attributed to sacking the quarterback. But maybe this time address something that you really need. I'm not saying you didn't need a pass rusher, but man, you might have been able to use a cornerback. Maybe you could have used Brian Thomas Jr. You know, maybe you could have used a serious player. I'm not saying A.D. Mitchell isn't the answer, but it just seems like the draft, Ballard tries to be cute sometimes. And it's like, look, you know, he's incredible at the day 3 picks, the day 2 picks. I want to see a clear and concise yes when we see that 14th pick selected or whenever they select in the first round. You know, I think that he also needs to somehow, if it's not an issue, I don't know what the issue is because there's something wrong, but the culture needs to be like brushed up and cleaned up because these guys don't seem like they believe in their own teammates that they're playing hard enough. All right. You got guys again, like Zaire Franklin over here. You just won your 8th game of the season. You finished 8-9 and you're trying to be a smart ass. Like we need the fans need something new. Okay. And if Ballard's going to stay, he needs to clean up something. And it starts with free agency, be a little more concise earlier in the rounds in the draft. And you just have to do something about that culture because something is wrong within those walls.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and I really dove in deeply on this question,
Yeah.
in my piece today. And if you guys read it, I apologize for it being literally 2,600 words. Okay, it was a manifesto, honestly, but I really put a lot of detail in that just because I think it's not an easy solution, Drake. No matter where we look at how the Colts are going to fix this, because there are a lot of broken parts to this, and then Chris Ballard has fingerprints on a lot of that. I think yes, I do think that diving into free agency with using it more as a tool and be more aggressive in free agency is needed. Now, you also, it rarely works where you go out and buy a team and it ends up winning. We saw it with the Rams, but more often than not, it backfires on you. And honestly, Drake, when you look at the Colts cap situation, it's not because they have been paying a lot of their own guys. The Colts don't have as much cap space as in years past. So when you look at this all together, I think that they're still going to have to be smart, but there's ways to add to the cap. You could re-sign Quentin Nelson to another deal that would open up some cap space. Certainly let guys go that are currently going to be free agents. Don't re-sign them, bring them back. We'll have to see what happens with Braden Smith. If Braden Smith ultimately retires, or if the Colts move on from Braden Smith, that right there opens up $16 million in cap space. But I think, being more aggressive and using it more as a tool. I understand that the Colts tried to get some high dollar free agents last year and they spent a lot of money on their own guys, but that's not adding to this team. And simply going out and getting Joe Flacco and Raekwon Davis, who was abysmal this year, didn't help either. You can use free agency as a tool without buying a team. You use free agency to help plug some of the holes in your roster, like going out instead of bringing back Trey Sermon, going out and getting a reliable pass catching back. I think you can do that in the draft this year, but the point remains the same. Certainly Taven Bryan, get out of here. Raekwon Davis, you can cut Raekwon Davis, get out of here
and save money. By the way,
the you can address the interior of that defensive line with much better depth. Certainly, you want to have better depth at the safety position, better depth at linebacker. There's a ton of different areas that you can add to this team and not break the bank over. And you want to also try to add a difference maker or two. Use it as a tool, not as your entire roster, the entire way you build a roster. I think that has to be priority number one. I also think that Chris Ballard at times, we like our guys. That's a problem. You like your guys. That is the problem, because you're too confident in your guys. You're not being honest about how good your guys actually are. That's a huge problem. You're getting complacent with the guys that you have, which is allowing these guys to not continue to push to be better. Not adding competition is also kind of fueling the complacency that we're now seeing with this Colts team and why no one is getting better. As Luke Veerkamp, our good buddy, is that stud on the Lions, Al-Qadim Muhammad, available next season? I mean, AQM, shout out to you getting a nice big sack on Sunday Night Football last night, brother. Love to see it. But yeah, you take all this into account. And then finally, the culture, like you mentioned, Drake, the complacency, not allowing the competition, rewarding your own guys for mediocre play instead of, great play, but settling for good instead of striving for great. All of that needs to change. The culture needs to change. And I think the leaders on the Colts understand that, especially with the comments that are being made recently from DeForest Buckner, Michael Pittman, Kenny Moore, Quentin Nelson, those guys, those comments that have been made about this, the standard isn't good enough. Jonathan Taylor, add him in there. Standard hasn't been good enough, and the entire locker room needs to up their standard. And I really like what the leaders on the Colts have been saying after this season, and I hope it does bring about change. It definitely seems like they know who the bad apples in that locker room are. you potentially even mention one, the guy that was trying to high five an empty stadium to prove a point, even though he's got a captain on his chest, it hasn't really said much for this season. But I digress. I do think that Chris Ballard cannot just sit on his hands and expect the same thing that he's been doing over and over again to work. If he wants to be the Colts GM past next year, I truly think that big changes are made. Now, I'm not expecting a huge philosophical change, but I do think that he needs to evaluate everything about what he is doing as the general manager from the bottom up, and make adjustments to that. And if not, then I think he's digging his own grave, and the Colts aren't going to get better if he doesn't make those changes.
Yeah, and at least you have, I know this is going to maybe sting for certain fans, but at least you have a GM that's convicted in what he's doing. I know that sounds really irritating, but at least he's not like, oh, let's try this. No, let's try this. No, let's try this. He's a great scout. Chris Ballard is a phenomenal scout. He knows the college game. He's really good at finding those diamonds in the rough. All right, Jalen Jones, even Zaire Franklin, guys like Will Fries, 7th round picks. Will Fries should get a new contract. Okay, Ballard has some wins, but it's just the product. It's the overall wins. It's the missing the playoffs. I just think that this is the time to really show, Chris Ballard really needs to show that he is the man. He's the man for the job, because otherwise you're gonna get another ambiguous offseason. Sorry about that. You're going to get another ambiguous offseason, and you're just going to get a bunch of pissed off fans that are going to go into weekend looking at staring down a 7-9 record with the potential to fill the stadium half full. So I think that Chris Ballard has to have a shift in his philosophy somehow, some way. I know he had if it gets me fired, so be it. Well, man, I know that you might have had your clock reset, but dude, your quarterback's going into his 3rd year, total question mark as far as his passing. Your head coach is 500 right now. He's 17-17 as the head coach of the Colts. And it just seems like this team doesn't have direction. It really doesn't. It seems like there's no clear and cut direction. So I think that this has to be some kind of philosophical shift, or else I really do think you're just looking at 9 more wins at the most.
Paul Wilson, another $5 super chat. Thank you so much, man, for all of your support. We really, really do appreciate it. And Paul says, Shane stumbled over the captain question today. How about 3 captains only? Big Q, Defoe, and Rigoberto. 1 offense, defense, special teams only. And I think, Shane Steichen isn't the one that picks the captains. That's the players. I'm pretty sure that the way that it goes is that the number of captains is determined by a percentage of the vote that they receive, and certainly if you want, you could probably maybe try to raise the percentage of the vote that player has to receive in order to be a captain, but Shane Steichen isn't the one that picks. That's all player voted. The players voted for Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, DeForest Buckner, Kenny Moore, Zaire Franklin, all of those guys to be captains. So that's something that the players decide on, not the team. And I think it varies by coaching staff to coaching staff, obviously, but I think that's how Shane has done it. That's how the Colts did it under Frank Reich as well. And again, I do think that if the players don't feel like there's enough leadership, then the players need to vote accordingly for those captains. And I wouldn't keep just Big Q, Defoe. I think Kenny Moore's a good captain. I think Michael Pittman is a very good captain. And I think Ryan Kelly was a good captain as well when he was there, and who knows if he'll be back or not. So, but it is an interesting question to see, and there's definitely questions about who should be considered a leader in that locker room at this time. But Paul, thank you so much for all of your support. Really, really do appreciate it. Now, Drake, same question about Shane Steichen. Obviously, Shane Steichen is in a big time year as well. Maybe his last shot as head coach for the Indianapolis Colts. And he even said he's going to look at everything from the bottom up to see what failed this year and how he can improve. And he said he's going to be relentless in turning this thing around, which it's good to hear from your head coach. But now what's kind of turning that same question we talked about Ballard? What must Shane Steichen do if he wants to stay as the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts past 2025?
Man, it's difficult to say because I love what he does at times, right, as a head coach, but I do believe you need to relinquish your play calling duties. That's the first thing.
Okay.
I think you need to give those to Jim Bob Cooter. I think that he needs to almost adopt what Nick Sirianni did with him when he was in Philly. Because once, I'm not saying this will happen, but it seems like a lot of times when an offensive coordinator turns into a head coach, it is just, or even defensive coordinator, it just turns into too much more often than not. Like it seems like there's too much happening for Shane Steichen. So I think that he needs to do more of an overview, maybe a little bit more of a head coach. Let JBC handle the offense. Let your next defensive coordinator handle that defense. Focus more on Richardson's development. Focus more on the offense performing, right? Be more of the, I guess, like hard advice guy to your offensive coordinator than the guy who has to oversee everything, because a head coach has to do a lot. Okay. And you know what else they have to do? They have to learn how to talk to the media. Shane doesn't know how the hell to do that. So maybe he takes that time not calling plays to learn how to answer questions when the media asks him stuff. So there's a lot of things I think that Steichen can improve on, but I'll dare say that he needs to relinquish play calling duties. Not saying he can't, say we should do this and then maybe let his offensive coordinator kind of retool it or edit it or whatever you want to say. But it just seems like it might be a little too much for him, because we saw during the 2024 season, especially that Packers game. I know it's early in the year. He had Richardson just deep shot, deep shot, deep shot, deep shot. It's like there were games like that where you're like, Steichen, what are you doing? And then there were games where you're like, hey, you're doing the right thing, but then Richardson's inaccurate. It just never seemed like the offense was anything more than, explosive at times, consistent with Jonathan Taylor. They ran the ball well at times, but it was just never a complete performance where you're like, wow, man, this offense looked absolutely fantastic. There wasn't one game where I felt that way. So I just think that Steichen needs to give the play calling duties to his OC.
Okay, that's an interesting take, and certainly one that I really haven't thought too much about. Tony Copeland, $10 super chat. Thank you for all your super chat. And Tony says, "I love Mr. Ballard. Says all the right things. Has a vision. Makes solid picks year in, year out. Ballard could literally suit up, throw 8 touchdowns, perfect pass rating, and fans would hate him for it." Now, Tony, I think that might be going.
I think they'd love him if he did that.
I mean, I think so too. I think that's going a little bit too far. I mean, let's face it. It is what you can't hide from the facts. Chris Ballard and the Colts have not won a division title in 8 years. Every other team in the AFC South has won the division at least twice. You can't make that. You can't. The excuse for Andrew Luck retiring can't happen anymore. It's no longer feasible. He's been here for 8 years. He makes solid picks, but solid isn't good enough. You need to have great picks year in and year out. You need to have a sustained culture. You need to stop settling for good and strive for great. I don't think I do think that some fans are going over the top on the Ballard hate, certainly, but that's why they're fans. But you also have to recognize that what Chris Ballard has done as a general manager of the Indianapolis Colts has not been good enough. So, Tony, appreciate your honesty, appreciate your insight, and appreciate all your support, man. Really, really do appreciate it. Also, we got Truett in here. Truett with the $5 super sticker. Truett, the absolute legend. Thank you so much for all of your support as always. But yeah, Drake, I don't know if it's necessary to play call anything to Jim Bob Cooter. I do think that the play calling needs to be better. I do think that the situationally has to be better. Yeah, he could certainly do better as far as talking to the media is concerned and not putting the team in such a bad situation. Publicly that way, because I understand why Shane Steichen does it at times. He wants to keep things close to the chest, but let's face it, sometimes it really, really hurts the team and the perception of players on the team has to be better than that. Really has to be better than that. I thought that Shane Steichen did much better as far as changing up the game plan once Anthony Richardson returned to the starting lineup. After the benching, it was a much more run-centric offense, and we saw that the Colts offense was much better after that as well, rather than the consistent deep shot after deep shot after deep shot, and then ending up in these situations where you were having to rely on your really young and experienced quarterback to try to bail you out. And that's not making an environment where Anthony Richardson can succeed. So I do think that that Shane Steichen, I also think that giving up on Shane Steichen too early isn't the right call. He's only been a head coach for 2 seasons. I think people have to kind of slow their roll with that. I think maybe it was a little bit of fool's gold seeing how Shane Steichen went 9-8 with Gardner Minshew largely at quarterback, and certainly he regressed in 2024. That's we're not going to sugarcoat that it was pretty obvious that he regressed in multiple different areas. But I also don't, but when you look at the bad teams around the NFL, one thing that a lot of these bad teams have in common is the constant turnover at the head coaching position over and over and over again. He's 2 years into a 6-year deal. He's a first-time head coach. The guy's not even 40 years old. Let's give him time to figure this out, okay? Now, I do think that if we don't see improvement in year 3, then yeah, it's probably time to move on and going to a different direction. But I do think he should be afforded the opportunity to figure this thing out, and certainly he's not perfect as a head coach. And I think there's a lot of things that he can improve on, but I think he should be afforded the opportunity to improve on those things from the ground up. Looking at, I think Colts Film Room put this out there on X or in his Discord, talking about how Shane Steichen really needs to look at everything: scheme, play calling, practice schedules, nutrition, everything, literally everything about this football program, and see where improvements can be made from the ground up. And I think, a lot of times we hear Shane Steichen saying a lot of coach speak. Today in his presser, yes, there was plenty of coach speak, but in that opening statement, I had it prepared for a later segment, but we'll talk about it right here. We want to put a winning product on the field that our fans can be proud of. When I got hired here last year, I talked about my 4 pillars: character, preparation, consistency, and being relentless. I can promise you this: I'm going to be relentless in my pursuit to get this thing going in the right direction moving forward. And I trust Shane Steichen will do that. Will he be successful? I don't know. But I do think that Shane Steichen needs to go back to the drawing board, assess everything from the top, bottom, and figure out where things went wrong, why they went wrong, and what he should, and figure out what he should do to improve that. And I think that will go a long way in addressing himself as being a better head coach, and it'll go a long way in addressing his leadership with the team and what this team can be capable of moving forward. Semper Colts fan, thank you for the super chat. Agree, Shane Steichen needs to give up play calling duties, head coach, and maybe that's something that Shane Steichen will decide on if he's not reaching the level of head coach that he needs to be because he is too focused on being a play caller. Maybe that's something that is discussed. We'll have to see. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think he can be a better play caller situationally. I think he can do a better job trusting players over plays in certain situations. But again, that's something that Shane Steichen is going to have to recognize, and if that's the case, then we'll see that change in 2024 in 2025. Excuse me. Thank you, Semper Colts fan, for all of your support. We really do appreciate it. So Drake, I think again, it's gonna be interesting. The bottom line is both Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen must improve immensely. Just as Anthony Richardson needs to improve immensely in 2025 if they want to be back in 2026. And if not, we're likely seeing after the 2025 season an entire teardown from GM, head coach, quarterback, and a lot of this roster. You're tearing it down to the studs and you're starting fresh for the 2026 season.
Yeah, and I don't want to pile it all on Shane Steichen. He can't control AD Mitchell's lack of awareness as a receiver, right? He can't control the tight end room absolutely falling flat on their freaking face as far as pass catchers. Okay, he can't control Will Fry's getting hurt, right? He can't control the lack of depth at certain positions. I mean, he can voice that stuff, right? But I think that Shane Steichen has a pivotal year because it's not just him as a third-year head coach going in 17-17. It's not just him, needing to find the right defensive coordinator now. Okay, you're looking dead at Steichen. What are you going to do about Anthony Richardson? That's the biggest thing that Shane Steichen needs to solve. Yes, the culture. Yes, the locker room. I think that you also need to get rid of certain players. We won't really go into that right now. I think that you need to let certain players walk off the team that will be pending free agents. Number 45. But like at the end of the day, I do think that Shane Steichen can control what he can control. And I do think sometimes maybe he's trying to do a little bit too much. But I do like what you said. And I like what you mentioned about Colts film room. Look at everything top to bottom. You want to save your job. You want to save this franchise. You want to save this uber talented quarterback. You pounded the table for this team to draft. Look at everything. And they're clearly already looking on the defensive side of the football. So the fact that he came into that press conference so convicted, it's not generally what you hear from Steichen. You don't hear that kind of conviction in his answers. And he didn't even get to ask a question. He just walked out there and said, hey, look, here's what I did wrong. That's really good. Okay, that's a guy who clearly understands that his seat is hot. All right, and it's not hot, but it's warming up. And I think that he wants to put a far better product on the field. Again, your floor must be 10 wins. You have to get 10 wins. You cannot fall below 10. You can't have 9. You can't have 8. You can't have 7, or else people are just going to look at this team like another Frank Reich team.
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be interesting. It always is with this Colts team. But like I mentioned, if Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen want to be with the Colts past 2025, we're going to have to see considerable improvement from both of those guys throughout this next season. So let's talk about the news that broke literally as soon as I hit the button to go live. The Colts part ways with defensive coordinator Gus Bradley. Drake, we knew this was coming. This was a move that it wasn't, we wanted it to happen, but we didn't think it was going to happen. I think we wanted it to happen. It was time to move on, and we knew it was going to happen. And the thing is, I like, people are going to say that part ways means that Gus Bradley got fired. That's really not the case. And here's why. I think I mentioned this again on X. Gus Bradley's contract with the Colts was a 3-year deal. He's been with the Colts for 3 years. When the 2024 season ended, Gus Bradley's contract expired with the Indianapolis Colts. They're parting ways with Gus Bradley because they're not offering him another deal. Gus Bradley's gone. Really, this entire defensive staff is going to be gone. Ron Miles, Richard Smith. We'll have to see about Charlie Partridge. I would assume that with Gus Bradley leaving, Charlie Partridge is gone as well, because you're going to want to allow the defensive coordinator that you bring in to hire his entire staff. So again, that it's probably everyone on that defensive staff needed to go when Gus Bradley left. And this is one of the big, massive changes that the Colts needed to make. The defense simply has not been good enough in Gus Bradley's tenure. I'm going to bring up my piece from today about what I would do to fix the Indianapolis Colts, or how to fix the incredibly broken Indianapolis Colts. I really dove into the rankings, Drake, and this is crazy. And actually, I'll put it up on the screen here so the people that are watching live can see it. We might as well share my 3,000 word article that I apologize to people that hey, if you made it through it, congrats.
It's a good one.
Thank you. I do appreciate it. But look here at the chart, Drake, and I'll zoom in so the people can actually see it. Yards allowed. The Colts went from 15th to 24th to 29th in the NFL. Points allowed, a little bit better in terms of ranking, but still 25 points a game allowed pretty much every single season, the bottom third of the NFL for Gus Bradley. The run defense got worse every single year in rankings and in yards allowed. The pass defense got worse every single year in rankings and yards allowed. Turnovers was the only thing that actually got markedly better. The Colts went from 19th in turnovers in 2022 to tied for 7th in the NFL in turnovers forced this year. But if you actually look at the numbers, 21 turnovers, 24 turnovers, 25 turnovers. Not really much different, Drake, than what we've seen over the years. Really just other teams in the NFL haven't been generating as many turnovers. So when you're just looking at the raw numbers for this defense, Drake, it hasn't been good. The defense has gotten worse at every turn. And the core issues for this defense have never gotten better since Gus Bradley got here. Tackling has been abysmal. It was the worst it's ever been for this Colts defense this year with missed tackles. The running joke amongst Colts fans, every time that the Colts would get into a third and long situation, who cares? The opposing offense is going to pick it up against Gus Bradley's defense. Sure enough, we saw that again on Sunday. Almost happened on the last play of the game. Jaguars are facing 4th and 20-something, and Brian Thomas Jr. almost gets the first down. It's ridiculous. When you talk about all this, you talk about the lack of improvement. You see players aren't getting better. You see Gus Bradley trying to put players in spots and force them to adapt to his scheme rather than adjusting his defense to their strengths. It's like putting a square peg in a round hole. And we saw it with how Kenny Moore struggled so badly in 2022. And it actually took multiple meetings, multiple discussions with Gus Bradley for Bradley to even change things up to get Kenny Moore back into what he was really good at and back to the player that he was. It's just been a recipe for disaster the entire time. Gus Bradley, his tenure with Indianapolis, not very good. And it's one of the major changes that needed to be made in order for this Colts team to improve in 2025 and beyond, honestly. So I expected this move. I'm all for this move. And I think now that the Colts can continue to look at really rebuilding and retooling this entire defense from the ground up, including scheme and including personnel.
Yeah, and look, Gus Bradley, okay, consummate professional. We're not sitting here trying to
great person, great person, great dude.
Great interview. Yeah,
yes.
He'll interview and he'll give you straight answers. He'll say, I screwed up, this player screwed up, we screwed up. He'll own it all. You couldn't ask for a better person, right? But in this business, you have to win. And when Bradley was winning, man, he had guys like Cam Chancellor, all right? He had guys like Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, okay? Like, I mean, come on, man. And Bobby Wagner, good God almighty. Like, this dude had a couple Hall of Famers on the defense. So I know you got DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart and this and that, but, when you play off like he does, it's an outdated scheme. Bradley is going to stick, kind of like Ballard, with what he believes in and what has made him successful. And he also has assistants like Ron Miles that are bought into what he's doing and other people as well. And it's like, this was much needed. I think I hate to say this, I really do, because I think that there are some seriously skilled veteran coordinators in the NFL. It's just with Bradley, he was very stubborn. I just think that you need a fresh mind in there that is maybe just a skosh more aggressive, a little bit more privy to adjustments, and putting the player in the position to succeed based off of what they do well. You go back to what Kenny Moore didn't do in 2022, right? So it's like, 2023. So it's like, you look at this defense and the stats you provided. By the way, it might be a long piece, but people, please go read Andrew's piece on how to fix the Colts, because this man put his soul into that piece, and he's absolutely spot on, especially with Gus Bradley. This had to happen. I think that this is where you really start the change. Now, what else is going to change? Who knows? But I think that you need a more updated and modern approach to NFL defenses. You can't just sit back on these wide receivers nowadays and let guys like Drake May, Drew Lock, whoever the hell else. Last year it was Jake Browning. I mean, Taylor Heineke. You can't let guys like that dice you alive. I mean, even Mac Jones at times looked pretty good. So it's like, this is a defensive scheme that needed to go, and I'm glad the Colts at least acknowledged that.
Yeah, I agree fully there. Now the question kind of shifts to who should the Colts look to go after for their defense, for their new defensive coordinator. And I think it gets, the names people are going to throw out there immediately. Bob Saleh. Of course, that would be priority number one. But is Bob Saleh actually going to come here? And Real 100 says, where can I find Andrew's take on the Colts? Horseshoehuddle.com. It's the title of the article is How to Fix the Incredibly Broken Indianapolis Colts. I really went into detail on everything, but yeah, horseshoehuddle.com.
Andrew flexes muscles in that.
That's where Drake and I, all of our written work is. You're too kind, Drake, but definitely go check out that and everything else that our fantastic staff writes over there on the site on Indianapolis Colts on SI. But Drake, I mean, people are going to say Bob Saleh. Well, the thing about Bob Saleh is Gus Bradley is Saleh has gone on record that he sees Bradley as a father figure, and that he's very close with Gus Bradley. Now, I don't think the Colts did anything disrespectful to Bradley. They didn't fire him. They just said, hey, we're not going to bring him back. But at the same time, Do we think that Saleh is going to replace his mentor? I just don't know about that. Lou Anarumo from the Cincinnati Bengals. Yeah, I think he's another big name, but again, I think he's going to have a lot of suitors out there as Drake tries to fix his camera here. He's going to have a lot of suitors, and I'm not sure if he's going to want to come to an Indianapolis Colts team that may potentially, have coaching changes or a complete rebuild in 2026. That's, I think, what's going to be the biggest issue for the Colts this offseason in terms of finding a top-tier defensive coordinator, is because they may have a lame duck GM, they may have a lame duck head coach, because if they can't turn things around, that defensive coordinator is likely going to be fired after 1 year when they completely clean house. So guys like Robert Saleh, guys like Lou Anarumo, Brian Flores, I don't think is even being considered. Brian Flores, because he wants to be a head coach. And here's the thing too: you also have to take into account defensive coordinators that are going to have an even front, a 4-3 defense. With Ballard as the general manager, he's always said that they're going to have they wants to have an even front. They wants to have a defense that is going to rely on pass rushers and getting after the quarterback. You're going to want a defense that it probably doesn't blitz a lot. Isn't going to be one of the top blitzing teams in the NFL. All of that is going to be paramount in this. And what Shane Steichen has said, Shane Steichen holds the same philosophy for defense, for his defensive coordinator. He wants his defense to limit the explosive plays. So that's probably what you have to expect out of a defense. So when you're looking at potential names, I think the top names that I would consider as far as big names, you're probably looking at maybe Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen could be maybe the biggest name. I think our colleague Zach Hicks talked about this as well, maybe today on X, that Dennis Allen might be the biggest name that the Colts are able to get. Chris Harris is a name, and Chris Harris may actually be the leader in the clubhouse for this. Chris Harris is I think he's the pass game coordinator currently for the Tennessee Titans. Chris Harris is a guy that knows Ballard. Actually interviewed for the defensive coordinator position for when Gus the defensive coordinator position in 2022 when Gus Bradley ultimately got the job. Yes, Chris Harris is the passing game coordinator and the cornerbacks coach for the Tennessee Titans currently, but he's tight with Ballard as Drake is able to return here. I was just talking about Dennis Allen is probably the biggest name. You have to think about Chris Harris, who could be the name in the favorite in the clubhouse because he interviewed with the team before for defensive coordinator, and he's very close with Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen, or even Jim Leonard. Jim Leonard is a guy that is a young position coach that could potentially be a hot name or a first time defensive coordinator that you know could make some noise, and he's very highly regarded around the league. But I think people need to temper expectations in terms of having Bob Saleh immediately come back, or getting Lou Anarumo, or Brian Flores, or any of those huge names, Drake, because of the current situation. Now, I think the one thing that could maybe calm anybody's fears on this, money talks. So if the Colts are willing to dish out top dollar for a defensive coordinator, and Jim Irsay, of course, would have to be on board with that. Jim Irsay would probably have to dive deep in his pockets to bring that money. I mean, then I think anything is possible because money does talk. MOS Al Golden, let's do it. Fantastic defensive coordinator for my Notre Dame Fighting Irish. So I would be all for that. And Stats Matt also makes a really, really good point here that Dennis Allen is a 3-4 guy, so that would be interesting. But Drake, what's your take on this as far as the defensive coordinators that the Colts could potentially attract, and do you think that the Colts have a legitimate shot? Maybe I'm completely off on this, but do you think they have a legitimate shot at getting one of the big name guys out there for their defensive coordinator position?
They have a big shot at getting a guy like that if they pony up the money. This team is not attractive, right? They're not attractive, I don't think, to anybody. I mean, unless there was a coordinator taking a vacant head coaching job, right? I think that kind of like Steichen did. And I think that's what's really attractive. But I don't know, man. I think Bob Saleh I'm not saying that you shouldn't take a former head coach, right, and put him in there. I mean, Jim Schwartz is another option, right? He's a former head coach. I mean, our own Zach Hicks not long ago wrote about possible replacements for Gus Bradley. And you know, those are good. I mean, there's a lot of options out there, but I think that the Colts need some youth. I think you need something new. I'm not saying you don't want to get the proven stuff, but you tried that, didn't you? You tried that with Gus Bradley, and just didn't work. I'm not saying he was elite, right? But like you thought it was going to work, and he's a veteran coordinator. So I think that because there's so many options, I do think that it would be interesting if the Colts maybe did something like what they did with Charlie Partridge, where they dipped into that college side of things and they said, hey,
certainly an option.
Come try this out. Let's see what you can do with our players. I don't mean to say this, but the Colts probably not going to keep Julian Blackmon. You need a safety. Juju Brents, what jury's out on him. You need more talent is my point. You need more talent defensively too. I just think that it's been really irritating just to kind of see this defense struggle and see this defense struggle against teams that they really should defeat. So I don't know, man. We'll have to see, but I would like to see a little bit of a younger hire. I think that would make a lot of sense for the Colts right now, especially after Bradley.
Someone to just give more energy to this defense. But I also think that because of the issues on defense, you need to have a guy that is willing to put players in position to succeed, not be so dedicated to the scheme that you're trying to do what Gus Bradley did, was force defenders that aren't very good at what you're asking them to do it anyway. I think the mark of a great defensive or offensive coach is really taking your players, evaluating what their strengths are, and using that to your advantage. So we'll have to see. I mean, there's other names out there like Stats Matt saying Leslie Frazier. Leslie Frazier is certainly an interesting name. Has ties to the Indianapolis Colts as well from days with the Tony Dungy and all of that.
Wasn't he interviewed for their head coaching position?
I don't know if it was the head coach or if it was defensive coordinator. It might have been head coach. Okay. I'd have to dive into the records on that one. He's also Jim Leonard is my favorite to win the spot right now, says Stats Matt. And NFL Nerd asking Andrew Drake, y'all want to DC the Colts? Listen, I'm an offensive guy. I'm an offensive scheme type guy. That's where my passion and my expertise lives. And I'll tell you what, if you want me picking defensive plays or anything, my defense on Madden is hot garbage. My defense on NCAA, hot garbage. So I'm a better offensive guy than a defensive guy, NFL Nerd. I don't know about you, Drake, but that would be a terrible hire if they took me as the DC.
I on both those games, I like to run the crap out of the ball and keep games close and then lean on my defense, which more often than not, sometimes, possibly every now and again wins. Does that work as an answer? So neither one of us
really
would be good defensive coordinators.
Yeah. So we'll have to see. But yeah, and with Gus Bradley being gone, like we said, the entire defensive staff at the Indianapolis Colts is gone too. There's going to be a lot of changes on the defensive side of the ball, and I think that's a good thing. Reinvigorate this team. I think, get an influx of talent on the defensive side of the ball is much needed as well. Put guys in better positions to succeed. Have a new staff and a new group reevaluate the talent on this team. And certainly you want to move forward and putting your best players in that position to succeed, like Buckner, Grover Stewart, Kenny Moore. Get more out of the pass rush with Leatu Latu, Kwity Paye, and your building blocks moving forward. So we'll obviously keep you all up to date on this defensive coordinator search for the Indianapolis Colts, and talk about how, whenever we hear about various parties that are being interviewed for the job, we'll certainly talk about that. But I would, like I said, I would expect my favorites of Chris Harris, Jim Leonard, someone of that type. And if the Colts can get a big name like Robert Saleh or Lou Anarumo, I think that it's going to take a lot of money to get that done. So Drake, we only got a few minutes left here. So let's kind of finish it up with some of what the players talked about today. with the Indianapolis Colts, because I think their words really speak volumes. So one of the things that obviously we're going to talk about, Anthony Richardson, an up and down season in 2024, excuse me. And he is one of those guys that is going to need to have market improvement and a considerable improvement in 2025 if he wants to continue and be this franchise quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts. And he was asked today, what's the biggest thing you improved on throughout the season and going through that adversity? And he said, I think being intentional, honestly. Sometimes you do something for so long, it's like, okay, that's routine, that's natural. When you know, like, okay, I can do that with my eyes closed. But to get better, I feel like you have to be intentional about every single thing you're doing every minute of the day. You can't just let it just fly by because you've been doing it for so long. So I think just being intentional, that's something I definitely learned about this year or this past season. Definitely looking forward to this year, just being intentional about every single thing, no matter what. A lot of that's I think you can see in just that answer alone the amount of maturation that has taken place with Anthony Richardson since the benching. I don't think that a year ago that would have not have been his answer about what he's improved on. And that's the thing about being intentional, the preparation, the attention to detail, all the things that were questioned about Anthony Richardson and why he was benched. That's what he's been pouring all of his energy into since the benching. So I really like the words from the quarterback there. And I do think that it's going to stick. I think that light switch has flipped for him. And I don't think that preparation, attention to detail, that's ever going to be a question anymore with number 5.
No, and Anthony Richardson's a very smart quarterback. I mean, his IQ is good, right? It's the mechanics. It's like Andrew always talks about this, marrying his body to his hips, to his feet when he throws. And it's all about the feet when you're throwing. And he's made improvements, right? But I also think the Colts, it would behoove Indianapolis to sign somebody who's going to push Anthony. Okay, I'm not saying Gardner didn't. I'm not saying Joe Flacco couldn't. But I'm talking about somebody who is actually going to push this man, okay? I mean, that's going to try to get that starting position. Not saying Flacco didn't, but he's like 40 years old, right? He's just kind of playing a backseat role. He's the dad, he's just like, whatever, man. He's older than some of the freaking coaches on that football team. So I think that Richardson needs pushed. I also do think that year 3, I think there is also enough pressure without even signing somebody, Andrew, for Richardson to step up in year 3. And you've heard it based off of his answers. He knows he screwed up at times. He knows why he was benched. That benching, say what you want, it worked. It worked. Okay. It gave him the reality check. Like, hey, bud, no one cares about your talent. If you're not going to prepare correctly, we don't feel like you're ready. We'll let Joe Flacco start, even though we know he's not going to elevate this offense much more than you do. Okay. The Colts said, we don't care. We're going to sit you. And it worked. So I think that Richardson doesn't want to get benched again. I think that he's going to remember that. And I think he's also going to remember the fact he didn't play the last 2 games of the season, which sucks because I think that we really wanted to see what he was going to do against the Giants. We really wanted to see what he was going to do in the season finale. There's a lot to live up to in year 3 for Richardson. And honestly, Andrew, number 1, availability.
Yeah, it is. And that's something that he's going to have to work on. And it's not going to be answered probably for us a couple of seasons, unless he goes out there, plays all 17 games next year and doesn't have any issues. And I think the Colts will bring in competition for Anthony Richardson because the competition needs to be brought in every single position on this roster, including quarterback. So, and I see people in the chat saying that the Colts need to draft a quarterback late. Guys, I promise you, this quarterback class is awful. It's hot garbage. There may be only 2 quarterbacks taken in the first round. And honestly, they might not even be first-round talents. This draft class at the quarterback position is rivaling the 2022 draft class with Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, all of those guys. It's bad. If you're looking for your franchise quarterback, there might be 2 guys that could potentially be a franchise quarterback. Otherwise, you're probably going to need to bring in a free agent veteran to push Anthony Richardson, would be my guess for the Colts. But then that kind of leads us to the next thing he said. Do you think next year is a make it or break it year for you? And then Richardson said, I mean, it could be. I guess every day could be make it or break it day for me. So I try not to think about it like that. I try to be the best version of myself every way I could be. You can lose your job in a day. So I don't think just a year can determine whether or not. I just have to make sure I'm on point, doing my job doing everything I can to help this organization go in the right direction, and the rest is up to God. Again, he knows that he could lose his job in a day because it literally happened to him, Drake. I think that's a good way to look at it. And I think, again, it's stuck with Anthony Richardson. I don't think it's going to be a problem moving forward. But Drake, I want to talk about DeForest Buckner, because the quotes DeForest Buckner put out there today,
big time.
Wow, really big time.
Yep.
Let's get right into it. But DeForest Buckner was asked defensively, what do you think was missing this year? Was there a step back at all, or do you think you just fell short? And Buckner said, yeah, I think it's definitely a step back defensively for sure. Since I've been here, since I've been a Colt, this has been our worst year defensively for sure. And I feel like at times we were just a bunch of individuals out there, and it looked like it. I'm not going to shy away from it. I take ownership of it. It didn't look like a unit out there at times, and it showed. And the times where we did play as a unit, we did some good things. And looking back at the schedule and the season, when we played some really good offenses, you saw glimpses of us playing at a high level and playing as the defense. And then when we played some offenses that weren't very good, and all of a sudden it was like, what happened to the defense this week? There was no consistency, no camaraderie defensively, and I take part ownership of that. I'm one of the leaders on the defensive side, and that's one of those things where I have to look back and see how I can be better as a leader. That speaks volumes, man. That just speaks incredible volumes when he is saying worst year defensively since he has been a Colt, and they weren't playing as a unit. They were playing as a bunch of individuals out there. Again, speaking volumes to just the thoughts of what Buckner, his true feelings about some players on this defense, potentially some coaches on this defense, and it seems like Depot's not one of those guys that's going to go out and cuss up a storm or call anybody out by name. That's DeForest Buckner's way of calling people out to the media. Is that's about as detailed as you're going to be from DeForest Buckner, saying that it simply wasn't good enough and people need to get their ass in check. Otherwise, it's never going to be good enough.
Yeah, look, this is a guy who's soft-spoken. He's a gentle giant. He's constantly regarded as one of the nicest people that you're ever going to meet. And he's just very giving. He's a very giving guy. For him to even show this kind of frustration, which by the way is minimal. Okay. Remember what Kenny Moore said earlier in the season. He's like, guys aren't even trying. Mm-hmm. DeForest Buckner, this is his way of saying this defense sucked. We didn't play hard enough. There were multiple individuals I will not name that I felt like weren't playing hard enough, which, we won't get into it since it's so late in the episode, but DeForest Buckner's comments, I know that they interviewed Steichen, Richardson was interviewed, Pittman was interviewed. It's really DeForest Buckner's quotes you want to look into. This is a guy who's soft-spoken. He's a pro. He's a consummate professional. He'll play through every single freaking injury known to man. If that man has a fracture in his body, similar to Pittman or Blackman, he'll go out there and he'll play. Because he knows that that's what the fans want. He knows that that's what he's asked to do. For him to even speak out a little bit and say that he felt like this was the worst year he's ever played for this franchise, that speaks, like Andrew said, volumes, waves, mountains. Okay. And I think that the dismissal, the non-re-signing, however you want to put it, of Gus Bradley, the divorce, I think that there's a start there. Okay. Now I think that you have to take a step forward, because for a guy like Buckner to speak out like that, it's both positive and negative. You're glad he did it, but you're also like, God, it really sucks that he had to do that, because he doesn't want to.
And I think again, Buckner's speaking to players. I think he's speaking to coaches, and I think he's speaking to exactly a lot of people on this team, even front office personnel. That it has to be better. I think DeForest Buckner did that by saying he's going to go out there and recruit free agents. He wants free agents to this team. So Buckner's not holding anything back. He's calling out everyone in the organization and telling them simple, be better, or get the hell out. And that's why DeForest Buckner is such a great leader. And here again, just more on that. And this was before this question was even completed to Buckner. He already started his answer. So the question was, how do you think that happens where you don't feel like you guys are playing together when you have so many guys who have played together before? 3-letter word, Drake: ego. ego. There's times where ego gets in the way, and I feel like, especially in our business, playing in the NFL at a high level and as a team, everybody needs to check their ego at the door when they come in, if you know what I'm saying. We all have them, especially as men in that locker room. We all have egos, but the great teams, those guys, they sacrifice that ego and check it at the door. And then he was also asked the follow-up, you saw it, you could feel it, and he said you could feel it, you could see it on tape, that it was a consistent problem. It wasn't just one guy, it was a lot of guys. And like I said, I take part ownership of that and I'll be in serving a much better way next year. Buckner's fed up, dude. The egos have to be checked at the door. Didn't name anybody, but I think from everything that has come out this year, you can name a lot. You could probably think of at least a couple of guys on the defensive side of the ball, a couple of guys that have their own podcasts that have been in the news quite often, that have some egos that need to be checked at the effing door. You know, guys that are going out there. Patrick, you're an absolute menace in the chat as always. Gosh, get me off track here. But you see guys that are out there. You watch that final game of the season yesterday against the Jaguars, Drake. Some guys on the defensive side of the ball jogging to jogging to the football, not making plays on the football. And then when they do make a play, it's all about them. That needs out of the building. And if these guys aren't put in check, you know, then this loser culture, loser mentality, the complacency mentality, it's only going to stay there within this Colts locker room. But I do think that the Colts are making the right steps. The players, at least, are attempting to make the right steps because of the comments from Buckner, Pittman, Jonathan Taylor, Quentin Nelson, even Anthony Richardson. To an extent, Anthony Richardson has said some things that I think he's coming into being a more vocal leader, because he is starting to lead by example and taking things more serious and more intentionally. But things need to change. And good on DeForest Buckner for calling those things out and not being afraid to call those things out, because simply put, Drake, he's fed up, as he should be.
Yeah, and to make it very brief, you know, we know who we're talking about, right? Who needs an accountability check. And I think that when you have a soft-spoken giant, a guy who is just constantly producing, he's constantly efficient, he doesn't need to say much, and all he does is produce, a guy like DeForest Buckner, for him to come out like this, it really speaks, it speaks volumes. And look, I'll just go ahead and say it. I think that they need to let EJ Speed go. I think that you need to.
Well, his contract is up, so he won't be back. I can tell you that right now.
I think that you need to. I hate to say this. I know that there's fans that are mad at Zaire. Zaire had a career year. He had a terrible job tackling at times. I think that Zaire needs to have a reality check. I think Zaire Franklin is a captain level talent. I think that Zaire Franklin is a captain level player. I think Zaire needs to check his ego. I think that's the biggest thing. I think if Zaire Franklin checks his ego, I think you've got yourself a legitimate defensive captain. You look from top to bottom, defensive front, to the linebackers, to the safeties, to the cornerbacks. It just wasn't good enough defensively. Okay. Grover Stewart, DeForest Buckner on the interior, every game, giving 110%. Okay. I will just say that it made me sick to my stomach to see EJ Speed jogging up to a play. You get paid millions of dollars. You need to run. You need to sprint. You need to hustle. That's what you do. Okay. That's what you're supposed to do as a leader of a football team, especially defensively. Nobody wants to see your ass jogging on a freaking football field. Okay. So yeah, I'm happy DeForest Buckner, who's generally soft-spoken, generally pretty quiet, usually just has little pranks, like he, plays a prank on Tyquan Lewis for the Oregon Ducks beating OSU early in the season. That's DeForest Buckner typically. When he actually has to take that hat off and he actually has to show a little bit of frustration, that's when it's a lot of pissed offness. It's a lot of frustration that's been building up for years after years of this guy after he got traded to the team. That's years of frustration you heard from DeForest Buckner there. Answering questions before they're even finished getting asked. That's not DeForest Buckner. Man, he was out of his element when he was answering those questions. So it speaks volumes, man. And I think that they started off halfway decent by dismissing Gus Bradley. That's a start.
Yeah, and the thing is too, like I know fans are really upset with Zaire Franklin and calling for the Colts to get rid of him. And sure, if you're a big enough cancer in the locker room, you can certainly do that. I don't think it's reached that point. And guys, the Colts just signed Zaire Franklin to an extension last offseason. That hasn't even kicked in yet. It kicks in starting next year. Zaire Franklin's going to be with this team, for at least a few more seasons. But I do think a reality check is needed, whether that's DeForest Buckner, Quentin Nelson, Jonathan Taylor, Pittman, all the leaders sitting Zaire down now and talking about it, because you heard of what I just read from what DeForest Buckner said today. Here's the quote from Zaire Franklin when he was asked whether or not the Colts need to change in order to reach the playoffs for the first time in 5 years. This is from Nate Atkins of the Indy Star. Franklin said, "I don't make those decisions. All I can do is focus on myself and try to be the best version of me."
Now he makes me look stupid.
Drake, I don't have to say myself, me, egos at the door. I think we all know who DeForest Buckner was talking about there. But we got a couple more quotes here, but this is one from Michael Pittman. And this is why I saw somebody earlier in the chat who was talking crap about Michael Pittman, immediately blocked. There will not be Michael Pittman slander in the chat of myself and Drake's podcast ever, because this guy is an absolute dog. And we found that out today, just the extent of the back injury that Michael Pittman was playing through. Pittman said, "I actually had a little back fracture, so that's all it was. All it was, a fracture in your back, you can hardly freaking move." And that guy still played 16 games. So just having to manage that, I mean, the training staff was great in helping me do that, and credit to them for helping me get through it this year. The team doctors also told Michael Pittman that there was probably a good chance that the fracture was going to be worse. He had a scan on his back today at 1 o'clock to figure out if he was going to need surgery. That hasn't been released yet. But for Pittman to go out there, play 16 games, Drake, and when you look at Michael Pittman's stats, I put this out there earlier today, with a fractured back, because it didn't happen at the middle of the season. He first felt it in the joint practice sessions against the Arizona Cardinals back in training camp is when this guy fractured his back. Still goes out there with average to below average quarterback play, throwing the football all season, puts up 69 catches, 808 yards, and 3 touchdowns for Michael Pittman Jr. Absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. Michael Pittman is a dog, and this is the type of toughness and the type of ego that gets left at the door when you have guys that are literally playing through a broken back out there. He doesn't complain. All he does is go out there and do whatever the hell he can to be on the football field for his teammates. That is what you need in the locker room. That is the culture of, that is a guy that wants to be a part of a winning culture. That's the type of players that set up a winning culture. The Colts need more Michael Pittmans on their team and less Zaire Franklins.
Yes, so this is from my piece covering that. Pittman explained his decision to play through his setback. Quote, "That's just what you have to do for the guys." Pittman continued by saying, "This isn't a fair weather sport. Guys like Quentin Nelson, Jonathan Taylor, D-Buck, DeForest Buckner, they deserve my best, even when I don't feel up to it." He had a chip in his lower back. Look, I'll just tell you guys this. An idiot 34-year-old like me that gets up out of bed, tweaks his lower back. I say to myself, my work from home job sucks today because I have to sit down for too long. This dude's out there sky and high, pulling down game-winning touchdowns from Joey Flax, okay, with a bad lower back. All the men out there that are over the age of 30, hell, 25, you know lower back pain. You know all you need is a little bit of a pull or a push or some crap to happen in your back. You can barely mow the lawn. This dude's out there running freaking breaking routes and going deep and just doing his job. Michael Pittman, yeah, there will be no slander on this show about Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman is a warrior, and if anything, he's pushing himself too hard, if anything. And that is the attitude that the rest of this team needs to adopt, because if you do that, you will adopt the attitude of kind of like a Dan Campbell Lions. Bite your ankles. We're going to fight. We're going to keep going. And you see what it did for them. I'm not saying the Colts are the Lions. That's the culture you need. That's the culture you need, is a never die, never say give up attitude. Michael Pittman is the embodiment of that. So is DeForest Buckner. So is a guy like Quentin Nelson. Multiple guys did play through injury. They played hard, and I know that I'm a little concerned about Pittman pushing himself so hard, but I also kind of freaking love it. So,
and the thing is too, Paul Wilson makes a fantastic comment here. Let me find it, because it's not only that Pittman's out there playing football. The dude gets up early every day, and he's taking care of a full-blown farm.
that's right.
So he's taking care of a farm, and he's playing as in the NFL with a fractured back. And Drake, you took the final. We must be on the same wavelength, because you literally just read the final quote that I was going to highlight about doing it for Quentin Nelson, Jonathan Taylor, and D-Book. He's putting his ego at the door, as DeForest Buckner said, and he's going out there and playing for his teammates. And that's something that I think it's really goes back to the whole core of this thing called culture. And because there's been a really big debate between, if we're good culture just means you're winning football games. Well, I think it's deeper than that, because you have to have guys that are going to sacrifice and are going to do the things necessary in order to win. And it goes back to the Tony Dungy days with this Indianapolis Colts team. Over and over and over again, you can ask the multiple guys that are in the Hall of Fame, multiple guys that made Pro Bowls, multiple guys that were just role players on that team. They sacrificed and they did everything they could to go out there and win, because they didn't want to let Tony Dungy down. They didn't want to let Peyton Manning down. They didn't want to let Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne down. And that team was full of those types of guys. That's what I think the Colts need to do. You see those leaders out there that are putting their bodies and doing everything they can, putting it all on the line for this team. You need to have other guys that are to say, well, if those guys can do that, I don't want to let those guys down. I need to be doing just as much work as they are, if not more. So that way I don't let these guys down, and I'm not the person that's causing these losses for this team. So, Drake, we've gone an hour and 15 minutes on this show. It's pretty crazy to do, but there's just a lot of stuff to talk about with this team. But I think, just in summary, because so much stuff has happened over the past literally 24 hours, we're not even going to be able to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars game today. And honestly, there's really not much to talk about with that game. Colts won in overtime. There you go. That's the recap.
Yippee.
But I do think that, a lot is being there's going to be so many more changes that happen with this team. Obviously, Ballard and Steichen are back. Ballard probably shouldn't be. I make the argument that Steichen, you need to give him at least another year. He's a young coach. I think he's afforded the opportunity to try to figure it all out. Anthony Richardson, again, you have him for another year, but he has to make monumental improvements in year 3. Otherwise, the Anthony Richardson experiment is probably over. And then you get down to Gus Bradley being fired. A new defensive staff needs to be brought in. That was the right move. Now, which defensive coordinator you get, we'll have to see. Has to be the right person out there. It has to be the right person, but it brings the right culture, right accountability with this group. It's going to, Patrick, you absolute menace. Always throwing me off. It's going to be huge to see who they're able to get and how that all works out. We'll obviously be covering it all the way. And then the players, Drake. I think the leaders on this team, most of the leaders, I'm not going to say all of them, but most of the leaders get it. They understand what needs to happen. And I really like that they're being vocal about it. And the way they're going about it is a way that, they're not going to settle for this run it back crap anymore. Changes have to be made, not only in the coaching staff, but in the personnel staff and the philosophy. And if it isn't, then this Colts team has no future. And the players are communicating that as best as possible. And over these next couple of days, guys, the players all meet with Shane Steichen and with Chris Ballard. Every single one of them. You can bet, I would put a lot of money down that what we're hearing from the players to the media is only a smidge of what they're saying to Steichen and Chris Ballard behind closed doors. You think about what really DeForest Buckner, Quentin Nelson, Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor, all of those guys are Kenny Moore. All of those guys are saying to those guys, if Ballard doesn't listen to his top players, then there really is no hope. If he does listen to those players and what they want, then I think I truly do think this Colts team has a shot, despite how bad it may look currently for this team. It's all going to have to be proven and laid out on the table with actual results in 2025.
And look, I think that fans, I want to say the fans, they really voiced how pissed off they were in that last game. You know, there were season ticket holders. Andrew knows personally season ticket holders that were like 20 plus year ticket holders. They were like, I can't go to this game. Andrew didn't even take his dad to the game. Like, I mean, dude,
listen. My dad didn't want to go because Anthony Richardson wasn't playing, and we didn't want to get stuck 2 hours away from home in a snowstorm. But yeah, I didn't make the trip down to Indy this weekend. I watched from home, hung out with my son. By the way, Pittman's playing with a fractured back. I've got back pain from just lugging around my 25-pound son all day. So, I mean, believe me, Michael Pittman is a much has a lot more dog in him than I ever will. But continue, Drake. I apologize.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. At the end of the day, this is a team that needs to instill confidence in the fans. Okay. I understand that the players, the culture needs reset. You know, they've started with the defensive coordinator. There's going to be changes. Give these fans something to pay for. Give these fans some real tickets. Okay, give them something to watch on the freaking football field. Give them a floor of 10 wins. This is a fan base that used to watch number 18. They used to watch number 12 out there. I know those are hard quarterbacks to find, but it wasn't just the quarterbacks. It was like Andrew said, it was the culture. Peyton Manning would fall asleep watching film. Okay, it's that kind of culture that needs to return to Indianapolis. And you're just hoping that Shane Steichen, Chris Ballard can institute that culture. We'll have to see. There's a lot of changes that are still ahead, but it really does give a positive, I guess, a positive piece in the atmosphere, I guess, for Colts fans, that guys like Buckner finally, spoke out. Guys like Pittman are talking about how much they played through injury. I mean, you should hear the media talking to him about that back injury. They can't believe it. They can't believe that he played through that. I mean, there's legitimate, oh my gosh, they started asking more and more questions. You've really been hampering that since before the season started. I mean, me and Andrew were like, there's something wrong with Pittman. Turns out it's his back. Like, there's dogs in this franchise, and then there's guys that just don't want it. You got to get rid of, if it makes sense, the guys that don't want it, the guys that are on the fence like Zaire Franklin, sit their ass down and tell them, this is what we want you to do because you are worth it for this franchise. You can play well enough. You just need to grow the hell up. And then the guys like DeForest Buckner, Kenny Moore, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Jonathan Taylor, Quentin Nelson, those are your pillars, okay? Build around those guys. Stop giving these fans an embarrassing product on the field. They're paying a lot of money to watch you. Give them something to watch rather than having to sit at home during a Week 18 game when they probably wanted to go to Lucas Oil to watch you.
That's a hell of a rant, Drake, and I love it. And as we sit here, we're 28 and a half hours into the offseason for the Indianapolis Colts. It's already been one hell of a ride. It's only going to get more interesting from here. So that's our show for tonight, guys. An hour and 22 minutes and counting. Really appreciate every single one of you for joining us tonight. Every person that's going to listen to this, wherever you get your podcasts, appreciate the hell out of every single one of you, and we appreciate your Colts fandom, and really just talking Colts football with us all the time, every single week. Please follow us on all of our socials, like Horseshoe Huddle on Facebook, follow at Colts_SI on X, and subscribe to the Horseshoe Huddle YouTube channel. Hit that bell, turn on the notifications. You never want to miss us. And then, like I said, wherever you listen to podcasts, please subscribe, give us a 5-star review so we can reach other Colts fans just like you. Drake, tell the people what they need to go check out on horseshoehuddle.com, because you've got plenty out there that I think people need to catch up on.
Yeah, so I detailed a little bit more on what Michael Pittman said about his back. I've got the Colts did reveal their 2025 draft position. And then, of course, I've got my risers and fallers in the victory. I should have put parentheses, meaningless victory over the Jaguars. So I guess if you really feel like, there's nothing else to read, go check out that piece.
Hey, you always check out Drake's piece, as Patrick loves to talk about in the chat. I didn't give a shout out to the super chats. I'm gonna do that now. Lindsey Mack, Paul Wilson, Semper Colts fan, Tony Copeland. Let's see who else. Truitt, all of you guys. Thank you all so much. And Sear Art, thank you all for your support. Myself, guys, like I said, I wrote 2,600 words on how to fix the incredibly broken Indianapolis Colts, starting with what Chris Ballard needs to do, the changes to the defensive staff, what the Colts need to do personnel-wise in the influx of talent, then diving into what specifically Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson need to do this offseason as well. So make sure you check that out, as well as everything else on horseshoehuddle.com. Go follow Drake at DWalsterDrake. You can follow me at Andrew Moore NFL. And guys, we'll be back on Thursday night at a special time, 6 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, because guys, college football playoffs at 7:30. I know a lot of you are going to watch that, especially since Notre Dame's in it. I want to watch that. Go Fighting Irish. So we're going to be going live at 6 p.m. on Thursday night. Chris Ballard has his end of season presser Wednesday at 9 a.m. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to give all of our takes from the Chris Ballard end of season press conference, dive into all the quotes and everything that the general manager of the Indianapolis Colts had to say on Wednesday. So guys, please be sure to tune in at 6 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. Definitely going to be a good one here on the Horseshoe Huddle podcast. Thank you all once again for your support, and we'll see you on Thursday night to talk more exciting Colts off-season football with all of you. We'll see you then.